Good evening to everyone, and nice to have all of you with us today. This event is brought to you by Fellows Radar for Africa, that's the Norwegian Council for Africa. And my name is Larry Ibrahim Mohammed. I'm here in Tromsø, Norway. So today's topic is about elections in Ghana. And Ghana, the West African nation with a current population of about 30 million, has had an experience with a cocktail of different forms of government, from a parliamentary democracy in 1957 to several military rule, and at one point contemplated a form of a union government between politicians, security officials, and traditional rulers. It will seem that in 1992, the nation had a rendezvous with democracy for good. For close to 3 decades now, Ghana has not looked back and have organized successfully 8 different general elections in the Fourth Republic. This election is different. And for the first time in the Fourth Republic, we have a sitting president being challenged by a former president from a major opposition party. It is a contest of records. It's a contest of issues. But what are the issues that are germane to the Ghanaian voter today? With us, we have 3 panelists from Ghana. First is Professor Audrey Gajiko. She needs no introduction in the Ghanaian political and media landscape. She has more than 20 years experience in teaching, research, and advocacy. Her research interests and publications reflect the connection between media and gender, politics and democratic governance, and the role between media and conflict as well. Our second speaker will be Professor Henry Kwesi Prempeh. He's Executive Director for the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD, where he focuses on law, politics, and civil society. Now, CDD Ghana has shaped the political and governance contours in Ghana since its inception in 1998. Our final speaker will be Dr. Kwesi Amachi-Boateng, who is lecturer of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. He lectures at the Department of History and Political Studies, where he focuses on politics in Ghana, governance, leadership, and security. So today we would have all of our panelists give us a short introduction of about 15 minutes each. And afterwards, we would allow them to pick on any of the presentations they've heard from their co-panelists, any point that interests them and they would like to comment on. And then we will pick questions from the general public and audience who are following us. So without much I say, I would like to hand over the screen to Professor Audrey Gajiko.
Thank you very much, Larry, and hello to everybody listening and watching us. I'm glad to be on this panel. And I just want to begin by reminding us that this is our 8th election since we transited to democracy. And the previous ones have been relatively free and fair. And I use the word relative because there have been some contentions in the 1992 elections. If you would remember, the opposition NPP pulled out of the parliamentary elections because that year the parliamentary elections were scheduled differently from the presidential elections, claiming that the vote was rigged. And so there was a lot of contention there, and they didn't go to parliament because they didn't contest the parliamentary elections. So it was a bit of a rocky start. However, we got progressively much better in subsequent elections, even though in 2012, I'd like to remind people, again, the NPP government contested with an election petition. They brought an election petition against the winner, which was the NDC candidate, Mahama, then, and lost. But, you know, generally we are lauded as having, you know, pretty free and fair elections. in these elections, we have 12 presidential candidates, a bit crowded, 11 different parties that we can choose from, and 3 women contenders. But in reality, the contest is between only 2 candidates. The incumbent President Nana Akufo-Addo of the National Patriotic Party, NPP, and John Mahama of the National Democratic Congress, NDC. And as you noted, both have been in power before, so they have track records to account for and defend to voters. But I'll pick on what I think is the foremost issue for a lot of people, particularly female voters. And I think it's peace. Peace is a matter of utmost concern in these elections because of what has happened in past elections and even in by-elections in my constituency, Ayawaso West. I think it was just last year. And so there's a lot of concern. I've heard reports by security analysts warning about electoral violence. We know that over quite a few elections, there's been a culture of election vigilantes, foot soldiers, who can be quite violent. There have been reports already of incidents that have been pretty nasty. There's also the likelihood that the elections may be disputed. John Mahama, the opposition presidential candidate, has already started laying the ground, I think. There are suspicions over the Electoral Commission's independence and also contention over the compilation of the new voters register. And so, you know, the ground is already there for, I think, a dispute. But having said that, I also know that a lot of effort is being made, a lot of behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, to reduce the incidence of election violence. So for example, on Friday, the National Peace Council, under the aegis of the National Chief Imam and the governance think tank, IDEG, are organizing a National Peace Summit at which President Nana Akufo-Addo and former President Mahama will sign a peace pact. And I think that's really important to sort of lower the temperatures a bit. However, you know, last month, the National Election Security Task Force identified 6,178 flashpoints and potential trouble spots, you know? So, I mean, if I say I think peace is an issue, peace and non-violent elections is an issue for people. Media Foundation for West Africa, because I'm a media person, I pay attention to what is being said about the media. They've been doing a media monitoring for language exercise for a while. And they also are raising concern about the kind of incendiary language that, you know, is raising temperatures here. And the latest report says, you know, both major parties are the main culprit, although people aligned to the ruling party seem to record much more of the bellicose language, in spite of the fact that the president has publicly said we need peaceful elections. So, and then another issue, well, that people have been discussing is whether there'll be a runoff. I don't know. I mean, there have been a number of polls. We don't know, we no longer believe in polls. However, we do know that we would rather not see a runoff because we are a bit stressed and there's all of the coronavirus and so we don't want to go out to vote twice, you know. Having said that, for me, I would like to say a few more things about the inclusion of women in politics in this country and in these elections generally. And the first is something positive to note with a certain semblance of pride that the umpires of our elections, the 2016 election and this election, have been women. So we have a woman um, uh, election commissioner right now, and in the 2016 elections. So it's progress that we are getting more and more women in the political democratic space. Another good statistic is the fact that the EC says majority of our voters in these elections are women. So we have 70 million voters, 51.7%, so almost 52% are women, as against 48.3% who are male. So should we expect a change in fortunes of women contestants also? There was a lot of excitement when the opposition NDC chose a woman as vice presidential candidate, and there was speculation that more women would vote for the party because of that move. Um, but I also have to point out that there have been women vice presidential candidates in the past, but they were for minor parties. And so there was no chance that they were going to actually become vice presidents. This time, there's a real chance, and that's why it's significant. At the same time, we haven't seen through all of our elections a female voting bloc. So we haven't gotten to the place where we can say that Ghana has a women's voting bloc that can sway elections. As I mentioned, we have 3 women vying for the presidency. What are their chances? One is a former first lady, recently widowed, not particularly popular for all kinds of reasons. And this is her second time running. The first time, she didn't make a dent, and I doubt that she'll make a dent this time around, particularly since she can't even campaign because of the loss of her husband so close to elections. The second is a non-literate woman, also running for the second time, and she's often been treated as a kind of a joke. And then the third woman running is running for the first time, but she was a vice presidential candidate in 2016 for the PPP party. And so she has much more gravitas, but the party itself is in a weak position. So it's not likely that she will make any inroads. Although I keep saying it's good that the women are running, because we have to get used to the idea that women too can run, and one day we will get a viable candidate. Regarding parliament, we will be voting for 275 mostly male parliamentarians, many of them incumbents. And we continue to consistently underperform by all indices globally and on the continent. We are abysmal. We have currently 13% women legislators compared to a world average of 24%. And specific to Africa, we pale in comparison with Rwanda, which is at 61%, Namibia 46%, South Africa 43%, Senegal 42%, Cameroon 31%. And we are only better than our neighbor Nigeria, which is at 6%. So in these elections, according to the EC, there are 126 female parliamentary candidates, as against 788 males. So let that sink in for a minute. 126 females, 788 males. And it's my understanding that the NDC is fielding 23, 7 of whom are incumbents. The MPP is fielding 24 women, 14 of whom are incumbents. And so it leads me to think that the rest, the majority are from minor parties or independents, that if history is anything to go by, they've never, I mean, in the last elections, they haven't won any seats. So we don't know whether that will change. Now, looking at the numbers, I think the likelihood that we will increase the number of females in parliament this year is bleak, especially if you consider that in 2016, we had 136 women candidates contesting, making up 11.8% of the candidates, and 36 of them won. And the 36 was the highest ever number of women we've had in parliament. And so in 2012, we had 30 women in parliament, and at the time, 10.9% of those who were, 10.9% of women in parliament. And in those elections, there were 134 women candidates, and only 30 of them won. So if you do your math, you know, I'm not sure, one, whether we'll have more women in parliament, and I'm even more frightened that we'll lose women in parliament. So I think I'll stop here. I still have quite a few things. Maybe during discussions, I can weigh in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Odregajiko, for this exposition in terms of women relation to politics in Ghana, and for these interesting statistics that I think we can delve in when we start the discussion. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can post your questions in the question and answer session, or you can just post it in the general comment, and we will put this across to our panelists. Now we move straight to our second panelist, who is Professor Henry Kwesi-Prempeh. Professor, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening here from Accra. I am at CDD, Ghana Center for Democratic Development, which is a busy place to be every election year. This year is no exception. It's busy here because we run, we are the secretariat for the Coalition for Domestic Election Observers, which has been observing elections in Ghana in the 2000 elections. And so it's a busy season for us, getting ready to send our personnel into the field on Monday to observe the elections and the vote count. This year's election, as my colleague Audrey, who by the way happens to be the vice chair of my board, has indicated, is historic for multiple reasons. I mean, it's the first election in which the principal contestants are essentially faced off for a last rematch. The first time the incumbent president, Nana Akufo-Addo, encountered former President Mahama in an election was the year 2012. In that election, Mr. Mahama had just succeeded to the top spot of the NDC following the death of the then incumbent president, John Mills. And he completed the term of that president. It did not count for a full term because he only came in about 6 months to the completion of the term. So that's the first time they met. President Mahama won that election controversially because he went to the Supreme Court for adjudication of a dispute, which was held again in favor of President Mahama. The two faced off again in 2016. This time, the President Mahama was serving his first full term as president. And for the first time in a Ghanaian election, an incumbent president faced with re-election was defeated. And the person who defeated him is the incumbent president now, President Nana Akufo-Addo. So this is the third time the two are facing each other, and it would be their last. It would be the last election between those two participants. Now, the election is historic in another sense, which is that, of course, unlike many other democracies that have had to either postpone or even cancel elections in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Ghana is holding its election as scheduled. The constitutional timetable for elections has not been altered in the light of COVID. In fact, not only are we holding the election as scheduled, but a very important issue on the election calendar, which became hugely controversial earlier this year, was the question whether or not we would have a new voters register. The issue of voters register has been a controversial one in recent Ghanaian elections. The 2016 elections happened against the backdrop of several constitutional challenges in court by then opposition party, the NPP, about the quality of the register. And there were several decisions of the court getting very close, almost close to the election day, which essentially helped to define the rules of the game, the ground rules for the election with respect to the register. This year, so when it was announced by the Electoral Commission that there would be a new voters register, the opposition party opposed it. And of course, it became a huge controversy involving civil society, opposition party, and then of course, COVID intervened. And once COVID intervened, then there was another layer to the argument that because of COVID, it would be a bit reckless to go ahead and re-register the entire country, 17 million or so, under those conditions. Notwithstanding those objections, the Electoral Commission proceeded with the registration, which actually came off remarkably successfully, notwithstanding the COVID protocols in place. And I think because of the success of the registration exercise, which covered, as Audrey has mentioned, we got about 17 million voters on the register. We are going into this election with a bit more confidence in the ability of the EC to conduct this election. Now, this observation comes from a pre-election survey that CDD conducted, which was released about a month ago, showing a relatively high degree of public confidence in the ability of the EC to conduct the election, which we believe has a lot to do with the success with which the voter registration exercise was actually carried out. Now, the third thing that makes this an interesting election is also that the EC itself, the Electoral Commission itself, is what the Americans would call a rookie commission, in the sense that this is its first election. And again, it comes about a bit controversially because the last Electoral Commission, under the Ghanaian Constitution, a vacancy on the Electoral Commission, which is a 5-member commission, but only 3 of them are executive commissioners. So the real business of the commission is handled by the chair and 2 deputies. And in the period between the 2016 election and this election 2020, the entire commission from the last election was removed on the basis alleging certain infractions and certain violations. So it went through a constitutional process superintended by Supreme Court justices, and the verdict of that process was that those 3 commissioners were to be removed and were duly removed. Under our constitution, that meant that the 3 new vacancies on the commission would be filled essentially by selection by the president. The president essentially just nominates and appoints whoever the president of a council of state that is not necessarily entirely advised, that is not necessarily binding according to the Supreme Court precedent on the president. So we now have a situation where going into this election, the entire membership of the Electoral Commission has been appointed by the incumbent government pursuant to the constitutional process. Notwithstanding that this is really what the Constitution ordains, that obviously creates a political problem. So not surprisingly, the opposition party has indeed made allegations, there's a bit of a trust problem between the opposition party and the Electoral Commission. And as Audrey mentioned, there have been some, we are going into this election with that gap, deficit in trust, not totally healed. Even though the Electoral Commission has tried to undertake certain transparency kinds of actions in order to help boost its credentials for independence. So that's one other issue that I think is on the table, and which I suspect leads or has led Audrey to conclude that the election results may well be disputed. This is the background to that kind of observation. I think in terms of the issues, this election, I think, follows a pattern that began to emerge primarily in 2016. Earlier elections had usually been fought on the basis of the parties have always had manifestos in Ghana. I mean, elections have always been fought with parties producing, manifestos, making promises. But I think that it is fair to say that before 2016, the manifestos had not become that significant in our election. Now, in 2016, upon the election of the current government, they proceeded to take certain actions that I think have changed the landscape for politics in the current election. Those actions were that the key promises that the government made in that 2016 election, upon being elected, in some instances, many instances, they created special purpose ministries to deliver on those promises. So you have a ministry for regional reorganization and development, which was to see to the creation of 6 new administrative regions of the country, one of the campaign promises of the government at the time. We've seen the creation of a ministry for railway development, notwithstanding the existence of a ministry for transportation. This special purpose railway ministry is supposed to deliver on the government's promise to create, to rehabilitate the country's old colonial era railway system and extend it all the way from the south to the north. And then you have a ministry for special initiatives, whose purpose is to deliver on a promise made in 2016 by the government that it would allocate $1 million for every constituency, all 275 constituencies every year for certain special projects in those constituencies. So and then of course, the key flagship promise out of that election was the free senior high school policy, which the government has rolled out and which is superintended by a special free SHS secretariat at the Ministry of Education. There is also a special secretariat for a government's industrial policy program called 1D1F, One District, One Factory. So from that experience, I mean, we've begun to first see a government that seemed to be governing by manifesto. And it is not surprising that in the 2020 election, in this particular election, the campaign has been manifesto heavy. So you've seen a lot of manifesto promises from the challenger, which is the NDC now, trying to match these generally very popular manifesto policies of the incumbent government. So in a sense, it has generated almost, you would say, a race to the bottom in the sense that the campaigns have been fought on the basis of a lot of promises of free things. For the NPP's free secondary high school policy, which has graduated its first students just before the elections, the NDC now promises to actually extend it to private schools. So you see that when the NDC policy builds upon a promise that is popular by the current government, and then it extends it even further. The government's attempt to deal with the big problem of graduate unemployment, one of the tools or the policy instruments was this program called NAPCO and Nation Builders Corps, which is a short gap, stopgap, short-term employment program. The opposition party now in its manifesto says it's going to keep NAPCO and even make them permanent. So you're beginning to see the emergence of a campaign that is heavily fought on the basis of promises and manifesto promises. But the way the campaign is rolling out is completely oblivious of the post-COVID financial crunch or fiscal crunch that the Ghanaian government is inevitably going to find itself in, because these are a slew of promises, all of them essentially promising free things. So it's been a very free-heavy, manifesto-heavy campaign all the way to the end. Just this week, the NDC, opposition, the challenger, tweaked their written manifesto by making a promise to basically pay the tuition, waive fees, school fees for all students entering the university from next academic year. Just like that. And then the NPP counters with a promise to absorb through scholarship, a scholarship scheme, the fees of these same tertiary students. So this is what I describe as the race to the bottom. But the positive is that the campaign, although there's been the usual mudslinging and the usual, some of the usual nastiness about political campaigns or this kind, I think it has been essentially very, very manifesto focused and very driven by the issues. And I think top of the issue really is education. I mean, the whole issue of free secondary school, tuition free, boarding free. And you know, our secondary schools are not day schools for the most part. These are boarding schools. So when we say free secondary education in Ghana, we mean free boarding schools. And so it's really been a big campaign issue. So I think education is a big issue in this campaign, and then youth job creation, which has been really a consistently big issue. So you see that in their manifestos, they're all talking about jobs. Jobs are the key thing. I could just show here the NDC manifesto. Okay, I'm not able to show it, but it's titled Jobs and Prosperity for All, the People's Manifesto. There was jobs also in the NPP manifesto from the last election. And this year, they're essentially saying we are staying the course. So let us elect us so continue to do what we're doing. So those are the big issues in the election. In 2016, corruption was also a big issue in the election. It has not been a big manifesto issue, but it has been the undercurrent, especially going towards the end of the campaign season in the last couple of weeks. The resignation of the person appointed to a new office, an office of special prosecutor, which was promised by the incumbent government in 2016 as one of the ways of dealing with the corruption problem, was this creation of this office of special prosecutor. And the necessity for the office was essentially that the current arrangement has both the Attorney General, who is a member of the cabinet, also being basically the person that holds all the prosecutorial power in the country. So this new statutory body was created so that it would handle corruption cases, because there was a sense that the Attorney General, being a member of government, could not actually pursue corruption independently. The first person to hold that office just resigned toward the tail end of the campaign, and then began a series of public exchanges with the government and revelations and disclosures and accusations, which has brought the issue of corruption back into center stage, going towards the tail end of the campaign. It was otherwise not prominent. Neither of the parties had tried to make it a big issue, but this latest incident had also brought back that issue. Now, from the sense you get from the survey that we did, the sense you get is that because both candidates are essentially familiar faces, because they've both held the high office of president, the current incumbent and John Mahama, people are looking more at their records. So both have a record to defend. One, a record to defend from the previous administration where they were president, and the current one, a record to defend from the current administration. So even though the promises are still there, and because the promises almost try to equalize each other and it's almost a wash, what we are getting a sense of is that the voting public is looking more at who has more credibility to deliver on what promised based on their past record. So this is also, in a sense, a positive to the extent that the populace is beginning to hold governments accountable for delivering on their promise, and also will be ready to reward or punish them on the basis of the records that they have in office. I will hold off, I think my 15 minutes introduction is exhausted. I will probably return to talk about the issue of security and vigilantism and election-related violence when I have another opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Prempeh. This is a very comprehensive overview of the general issues within the general elections coming up for Ghana. Next is Dr. Kwesi Amachi-Boateng, who is with us from Kumasi. We will just hand over the screen to Dr. Kwesi Amachi-Boateng.
Thank you, Larry. And let me send my greetings to you, to Hilda, and to Wes, and of course, my fellow panelists, actually. Ghana is going into its 8th democratic elections. And actually, it gives us an indication of the progress Ghana has made in the Fourth Republic in the area of political development generally, and specifically managing to establish stability in the context of which Ghanaians expect, development. They expect the political leaders to manage the nation properly, use the resources in a way as to bring improvement in their conditions of life. The elections that we're going into really is crucial because, like Professor Prempeh said, we're going over a bend. The politics is now full of promises, and then they are not just going to be empty promises. The current government went beyond the promises, it gave the people of Ghana during the political campaigns leading to the elections of 2016. It has gone beyond that, to deliver actually as much as possible. The short period of time notwithstanding, it has tried to actually honor the words, the promises that the government gave the people of Ghana. One issue, though, is still outstanding: effectively fighting political corruption. But let me say that generally, the political parties in the Fourth Republic, the political elites generally, and then the elites of Ghana and the people of Ghana have done well by working together to sustain the current democratic practice. And that speaks to one thing. There appear to be consensus around what we call the rules of the game. And that has to do with the constitution of the Fourth Republic. As much as possible, issues crop up. But invariably, everybody comes to an understanding that they need to go to the courts to find solutions to the issues. And specifically, speaking to issues pertaining to elections. 2012 actually was a real case, for Ghana. Although people say that in 2008, Ghana went through a major challenge. And then the person that lost the election, eventually, people say that initially there was a measure of reluctance, but eventually considered defeat. The system proceeded. We came again in 2012 hotly contested elections that came very close, and the disputes that came up, had to be settled in the courts. But you see, whenever in a democracy you have such electoral disputes, and then the actors work by going to the courts, then the implication is that they are doing the right thing. They are demonstrating their commitment to the constitution of the state. They are showing that they are playing by the rules, because the electoral process ends with the court all the time. So that when it becomes necessary for someone to proceed beyond the pronouncement of the election management body and decide to go to court, it's all fair and proper. Ghana did that in 2012. And so personally, yes, there have been causes for people to be apprehensive of conflicts erupting. Occasionally, there will be some sort of such disturbances, some individuals resorting to fighting to resolve some issue. But I like to believe that the progress Ghana has made, the institutions established around the resolution of electoral disputes, is such that we can really have a measure of faith that the Ghanaian political system, the Ghanaian democratic system has been working. And so I expect it to work. Of course, the compilation of the voters register has not come without challenges. And it was only fair that the parties that had issues with the processes, the procedures, came public with it. And to me, that enabled the Electoral Commission to also examine its actions and inactions to see whether indeed there were some infractions that had to be addressed. And at the end of the day, the EC's publicizing the voters register publicly, coming public with the voters register the way the EC has done, to me, establishes that openness, that transparency for everybody to scrutinize the voters register to see if there's anything untoward. Has the EC acted in any way to favor any political party? Political scientists are interested in that action of the EC because for electoral process to become legitimate and to have credibility, then it should be able to generate what they refer to as substantive, they should be able to establish initially procedural legitimacy, and then they should be able to substantive indeterminacy. It shouldn't be possible for anybody ahead of time to say that on the basis of the work of the EC, Party A is placed in an unfair advantage, to be able to win. And for that matter, there have been biases in the work of the EC. So I think the voters register, which have been published, the way it has done, is a big issue. And then it's challenging anyone who is going to have issues going forward. Ghana's procedures for elections, especially when we go through the voting, the counting, and then delivering the final outcome, have gone through such procedures such that actually where we have come to is going to be very difficult for rigging to take place, because they are counted initially in the presence of the general public. At the place of collation, all party representatives are there. And then the final collation is done. They have to append their signatures to indicate that what came out exactly represents the outcome. And then the EC in Accra, the electoral management body in Accra, is simply going to put together the outcome of these elections from the regions. It doesn't stand any chance to affect the outcome. The EC doesn't. And so the electoral processes themselves, have come a long way to, by itself, enable people to have confidence and credibility in it. And so the issue of violence and stuff like that, Yes, some people may want to foment trouble, but that is why the security is there. So we expect the security, personnel to be very professional and then address the challenges that come up. But let me say, also add to what our democratic politics has been delivering. I say that our politics now is or has acquired what I call developmental values, because the politicians have come to terms with the fact that if they don't deliver on their promises, people's power will be exercised against them. They'll be punished and voted out of office. And as we know, political parties are, when they are not in government, definitely they are unemployed. They are out of business. They want to be in government. They want to be in power. And so whether it's not a question of leaving things to the goodwill of the politicians themselves any longer. Moving forward, the dynamism in democratic practice is starting to work in Ghana. And what Ghanaians call in local parlance, kukromotie power, has started to have its real effect. They get punished for not delivering on their promises. They get rewarded for delivering. And so it's not for nothing to see the convergence of, if you like, values in the two manifestos, the way Professor Prempeh has already taken us through. And that is what I refer to as our politics beginning to deliver development to the people of Ghana. So far, there have been various polls coming up with all sorts of predictions. We keep our fingers crossed to find out the real outcome, at the end of the day. But generally, let me also say that democratic practice is indeed a big challenge. And all over the place, occasionally, parties that are not in government have a cause or causes to suspect the political neutrality of the election management body. The case in the United States of America is really good for developing countries, because political scientists outside Africa, and if you like, in the other parts of the world with established democracies, so easily take on cases coming from our parts of the world. There's nothing wrong if a member of the opposition has issues, if they don't trust the individuals in the office. But I like to believe that they don't need to trust the persons in the office. They got to scrutinize their work and on the basis of their work, come out with specific issues to say that on account of matters A, B, C, the election management body is not being fair, it's not serving its mandate, in a fair manner. The election management body is not creating a level playing field for everybody. If you don't have hardcore evidence, all you need to do is to submit to the rules of the game and then play the games within the rules. Thank you. I'll hold on for now.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We've had some questions coming in already. I would encourage that our digital audience keep sending your questions, and then we can put it across to our panelists. I would want to start with a question on gender, which has come to us. And so I would give you the opportunity to respond to this question, and then each of the panelists, if you feel you want to pick up on any of the points that your fellow panelists have made, you're free to do so in addition to the question that I'll pose to you. Yes, Professor Audrey Gajipo has given us an exposition a lot in terms of women participation and where they stand now. Indeed, if you look through the Ghana National Policy on Gender, there is evidence to show that households that are managed or headed by females, they do relatively better than men, actually. These are what the statistics say. And currently our parliament has about 275 membership with only 37 women and with 238 men, if I'm not mistaken. There's a question from Kofi in the panelist who says, I want to ask Audrey if she thinks is the system working against women, or is that women who have not shown enough interest in the business of politics, and what can be done about it? So what is the problem? What can we do? I would like you to just give a quick response, and if any of the panelists would like to take a bite on this, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you, Kofi. That's not a quick response question, it's a big question. And I wonder what Kofi means by the system. So I will be mischievous and say, absolutely is the system, and I'll tell you why. It's both the social, cultural system and the political system. So the social, cultural system means that, by that I mean, Ghana is still a very patriarchal society. Women have made a lot of inroads in many places, but I think that culturally still women are discouraged from being in the public limelight, particularly in political spaces. Political spaces are still constructed as places that are really meant for males. So a lot of cultural, psychological conditioning works against women going into those spaces. From your family to other people will probably discourage you. Why? Because the political culture is also inhospitable to women. The political culture is rough. There is still, as I said, Media Foundation for West Africa tracks incendiary language during politics. So it's a political terrain that is pretty rough in terms of how it treats opponents. And because we're in a culture that thinks women should be demure and is sensitive to women's dignity, then you're going to get a lot of women being discouraged from doing politics because they don't want to be insulted. A lot of name calling, then the whole network, political network of patronage, women haven't been very good at penetrating that network because they've been late to the game. And also, you will find out that there's the financial as well. That's tied to the network. And women aren't able to marshal enough financial resources. So they don't have enough godfathers. They don't have, and therefore, then the larger political system that we operate, which is first past the post, has always traditionally been not very favorable to women, particularly when they are coming from a disadvantaged position. Many, many years where you didn't have women in the political space. So unless there's a quota system, it's not going to change. You know, the first past the post system in itself is a system that does not inure to the benefit of women. There have been attempts by parties, well, lip service mostly, but perhaps in 2016 it was, the NPP attempted to do some sort of affirmative action that was quite minimal, but I was surprised at the pushback. And what was that? It said that the women who already held seats, nobody should contest against them because they wanted to increase the number of women. And there was a backlash, and the party capitulated. So the only concession that are giving women are reduction in fees, you know. But the real structure, I always challenge parties that if you really want more women, you talk about having more women within your political party. Why? Then you should try and get them during the primaries into safe seats. If you can, but the men in the safe seats do not want to give it up for women just so that the party and ultimately the country can achieve gender parity. So it's the political system and the social-cultural system and the political culture that is inhospitable to women.
Thank you, Professor Odrigaduko. Anyone wants to take a bite? Why is it that we are not even having the affirmative action bill passed into law? What is holding it? And as men in the panelists, what do you envision is the role for men in terms of making it easier for women to participate?
Okay, let me just come in. It's a big challenge, actually, because generally speaking, the role of men is crucial, it's critical. You expect that every woman who will want to participate actively in a political process, might be a married person. If the person is not, that might even become a challenge. The accusations, the insults could, come from that direction. And like Audrey said, the social cultural setting simply discourages women from coming out. It is like a certain idea, the patriarchal nature of our society. It's like, look, you want to lord things over us, sort of. And so a husband will want to be really committed and have a big heart, to openly support his wife to go into politics in the political parties. The men, it's a question of interest in the political parties. They save seats. The men go in for it because essentially they themselves know that the system has not been distributing Ghana's resources effectively enough. And so if they themselves don't find themselves there, if they themselves are not in parliament, they might not necessarily get what they want to get. So, I mean, this issue of showing goodwill, good faith, and then stepping aside for a woman to come in, I'm wondering, I don't think we've experienced one, and I'm wondering whether it's ever going to come. The men want to be there for, their own good, their own interest. And they will always want to keep the women, in the background.
Yeah, may I weigh in on the same issue?
Yes, do please.
Yeah, I think Audrey mentioned campaign. Among other things, the cost of politics, the financial cost of politics, and in Ghana, our politics. Some study that we did after the 2016 elections really shows that the cost of running for a seat from the primaries to all the way to the general elections is quite astronomical and actually growing. And the nature of our political financing or campaign financing regime is essentially free market. I mean, you really fund the campaign from your own resource and your own resourcefulness, whatever that means, right? So parties really provide very little material support for their candidates. A candidate must actually finance their own candidacy from their resources and their own resourcefulness, which is from their networks. And there's increasingly individuals who have been appointed to state offices, whether as ministers or CEOs in the state enterprise sector or as district chief executives, which is the equivalent of our mayors, but they are appointed by the president. You see that an initial appointment to one of those offices has become a springboard for contesting the parliamentary seat. So when you get a public office, it becomes essentially the ticket for you to generate the resources, the financial resources with which then to finance a run for parliament. And so part of the reason I think that you see is that, to the extent that women are underrepresented, even in appointive offices, they are sure to remain underrepresented in the elective offices because the appointive offices are those places where the appointees oftentimes go to raise money to come and run for elective office. So that's one of the sources of the disequilibrium. But I think that, I mean, both Audrey and my co-panelist, Dr. Akwachi, I'm actually right in looking at the cultural dimension, even though I think that oftentimes parties hide behind the culture to say that, you know, we can't do this and we can't do that. So let me give you a quick example from the Constitution. There is this provision in the Constitution, Article 22, which says, a spouse shall not be deprived of a reasonable provision out of the estate of a spouse, whether or not the spouse died having made a will. The Constitution proceeds to say, Parliament shall, as soon as practicable after the coming into force of the Constitution, enact legislation regulating the property rights of spouses. This provision is in the 1992 Constitution, adopted in 1992. The idea here was that it would actually be given meaning through legislation. Since 1993, the first Parliament, no Parliament has actually made good on this constitutional injunction, which is that the principle has been stated there. It only takes the political class to enact legislation to give meaning to the principle. So here is a political class that is not even willing to do that which the Constitution has mandated in the interest of gender parity. And then there is also the Constitution, an Article 17, which article actually allows for affirmative action, right? Actually, it basically promotes it, because in Article 17, as an exception to the equality clause in Article 1, which is all persons shall be equal before the law, Article 17, Clause 1, there is an Article 17, Clause 4, which says, notwithstanding that equality principle, if you are doing affirmative action to redress historical imbalances in society, you're free to do so. And that's, if we had a true affirmative action law, which in our Constitution would be applicable to political parties, you could use it to apply to parties. Parties would be better enabled to actually do the kind of affirmative action that Audrey is talking about, that Professor Gajeko is talking about. Currently, we just left it to the parties to figure out a way to increase the representation of women. I do not know that on their own they can do it or that they will do it. No, but if we really were to use the legal tools that have been provided and we were to enact legislation, for example, as envisaged under Article 17.4, that then could provide them a lawful basis to actually go ahead and do that. But I do not think that there is the will within the political class, which is male-dominated, to actually go in that direction. I mean, so it will take, perhaps, the move by, as Audrey said, currently you have one major party for the first time fielding a woman candidate as vice president. Maybe some of these things will come through politics of that kind. If the Constitution and the law is not going to work its way up that way, maybe through politics, as parties begin to respond to each other, because we have a very strong two-party system. And the parties, as we can see from their manifesto, they mimic each other. There's a convergence, almost policy convergence between the parties. So as parties begin to mimic each other, if one party is able to break free and say, look, we have fielded 50 women or 60 women or 80 women. Look at the other party, they are backward and they are this. That might actually be where the pressure comes. So within our politics, maybe the dynamics for our politics itself could lead the two parties in that direction, but at least one party must make a move.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have another question on security, but before I move into the question of security, I have a question with a preamble that I would want all of you to also.
Hello, if you can let me comment quickly on Professor, this is Professor Prempe's last submission.
Go ahead, 2 minutes.
Yeah, the whole thing is that would Ghanaians vote for an individual simply because she's a woman? The universities don't give us this, if you like, a case. In the universities, in most cases, they don't vote the women candidates who come out, to hold significant offices. So I think we have a real challenge. It goes beyond what the political parties could do.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, the issue about campaigns and policies that are instituted in our manifestos, and how now we see a seeming kind of competition between political parties. It's really something that is interesting. But then there's a flip side to this argument when it is done probably an eve to election or a few days to election. Money and other resources have formed an instrumental part of the political system and campaigns, from our primaries, the local level, to even to the national elections. And I call this situation probably like the commodification of election, where that we try to put some intrinsic economic value for the voter. And we see this on two levels, like political parties giving last minute promises. Just yesterday, I heard that the scholarship secretariat through the government want to have like 20 million Ghana cedis for high school students who are entering the tertiary. And then we've heard NDC that said that, oh, we are making it free for all high school students who just graduated going to the university. And then we have, on the other hand, political parties and party aspirants giving out cash and so on. So what does this mean to our government system? Is there any kind of implications, good or bad, that such commodification of election has on our democracy? And then are we mortgaging our elections to the highest bidder? If you have one or two thoughts on this.
Okay, I'll take that. I think my response is that I think you've answered your own questions. Questions are more, in my view, more rhetorical questions, because actually I think the assumptions that you make about those questions are actually quite correct. When you look at the elections, especially going down the wire, both at the level of promises that parties are making, you can tell that the political class is completely acting as though it faces no fiscal constraint at all. This is a country with one of the lowest tax revenue to GDP ratios in the, not just the world, in Africa. Our tax, we don't collect enough taxes relative to GDP as a country. And yet in the election, it's almost a painless election, right? In the sense that the electorate is promised everything under the sun, under the moon, for free. There is very little talk of how this will be paid for. Ghana has borrowed, Ghana is almost in the proximity, in the vicinity of debt distress, if you took it technically, just on the face of it. And then COVID, of course, has amplified and magnified the problem. So here we are, an election against the backdrop of COVID, and contemplating or anticipating a post-COVID financial crunch. And yet everything that about this election is completely oblivious of cost. So it's clearly, I think that the political economy that our politics has created around debt and taxation is such that no political party wants to impose more taxation because politically it's unpalatable. And so that the tool has been, we'll finance it the way everybody else finances it, which when you ask them how they're going to finance it, we'll finance it the way the other one financed it, which is through debt. Because for debt, basically the pain is deferred. The gain is immediate, the pain is deferred, and that is where I think there's a problem. Then the other side of the commodification is really what you also mentioned, which is that there's a lot of vote buying, right? In this election season, as in previous, and probably worse now. It's a lot, it's almost, free market, almost unregulated. You see candidates presenting openly, nobody's shy about it anymore, openly presenting material gifts to candidates. Sometimes even with official seal on it, there are pictures on it, there are pictures on TV screens, all of this stuff is going on, right? So, and in the CDD pre-election survey, we asked about development projects that are timed to be delivered around election season. Roads, road resurfacing, boreholes. And of course, in a sense, you could say that, part of, you could say with Dr. Amachi that these are part of the developmental gains that politics actually throws up for the people. For some communities, frankly, without politics, without these kinds of, public goods that are delivered around election season, they may not get anything at all. But because elections have become very tight and very closely fought, and the margins are generally small at the popular vote level, some communities are able to play this card and say, look, if you don't deliver electricity before election, we won't vote for you. If you don't deliver water, we won't vote for you. So citizens have also wised up to it and are playing the game, and the political class has responded. But there's no doubt that there is that level of commodification going on as well. I think clearly, nobody will really doubt that. I think the implications for the fiscal integrity of government after the election is the problem. This is the one thing about the manifesto development that concerns us as CDD, is that while we welcome the fact that it is pushing us towards issue-based politics, that it is also pushing us towards what Dr. Martin talks about, a certain convergence around development. The problem is that it is totally with complete disregard about cost and about the fiscal integrity of the state, especially when people are still promising tax reductions in a country that doesn't pay a lot of taxes, really. You still see manifesto promises promising freebies for people who can actually pay sometimes. So I think that's a big problem, no doubt.
Anyone who want to pick this? I will move to the next question from the digital audience. So there are two questions that I like to throw. I think one goes directly to Professor Prempeh, but then there's one on elections and EC's work. Indeed, the EC has promised that within 24 hours they aspire to give us a verdict in terms of declare the vote. And in case that there is any issues that had to be resorted to a court declaration, the court has also made a commitment to give us a verdict in 41 days. These are good things. But there are questions about the recent activities of secessionist group in the Volta region, and to what extent do we envision some of these security issues to affect or to travel into other parts of Ghana, affecting the general peaceful election that we all envisage to have? And then the second question is from Lisa Maria, and her question is that one of the main concerns before the election is electoral violence also. And knowing how important the media and civil society organizations are for promoting peaceful elections in Ghana, how do you see the mobilization before this election by CSOs and media respectively? So if you have any thought on these two questions, you can quickly pick this and then we can come to the last questions. Who wants to go first? Audrey or Machi, you have the screen.
I think Amachi can go first and I'll come after. I'll probably speak to the media issues, yeah.
Okay. Excuse me, can you come again for me in the first question?
Yeah, that's relating to election violence. The question is that we have recent activities from within the Volta region, this northern Togoland, in terms of secessionist movement and so on, and the potential of some of this to destabilize other parts of Ghana towards this election. So what is your view in terms of this security issue, especially within Volta region? And what do you think? Do you think there's a likelihood that this can spiral to other parts of Ghana to kind of have an effect on our elections?
Thank you very much. To me, the development in the Volta region recently, to me, is a contentious issue because to me, it's not fair on the protagonist. Virtually, the PNDC delivered the constitution of the Fourth Republic of Ghana, and the PNDC had a good number of people coming from the Volta region. The PNDC was in office for 19 years, 11 years uncontested power, 8 years in democratic Ghana. And I like to believe that if they have any concern, they should have raised it at that time to get the state that their own sons and daughters were in to address them. So to really go through that period and come today to raise the issues they are raising, they are not being fair to the people of Ghana. They are not sincere. And this is a personal thing. And I don't expect this thing to spill. It is an exclusive issue coming from that part of the country. I think the issue of any cultural group in Ghana desiring to, get out of the Ghanaian political system, I thought was settled. Although the one coming from the Volta region has been lacking. At the time of independence, I recall, from the literature, that there were some skirmishes at Alavano, and then they were addressed, in fact, through violence. Nkrumah sent the military there to deal with it. And over the years, I don't know what has happened, and then the politicians or the leaders from, the Volta region, the leaders of this insurrection, from the Volta region, have not engaged the politicians well enough to find a way out. But then, to me, the opportunity came during the PNDC time. So that is what I'm saying. Generally, in fact, what happened in the United States recently, to me, is very instructive. They didn't clash, but there were opposing sides who took to the streets to demonstrate in support of causes that they believe in, which were related to the elections. So when some such things happen in Africa, we should see them as part of the electoral game. Of course, occasionally from our parts of this world, it degenerates into violence. And Ghana has seen skirmishes of such violence before. But I don't expect the Ghanaian system to, blow out of hand because of the opportunity for the two major political parties to come into political office. Because of that opportunity, the Fourth Republic has demonstrated that, to the extent that people have faith in the system, that if they participate in it, they have a chance of getting into government and using political power to address some of the inadequacies in society, then it should allay the fears of any cultural group. So I don't expect what is happening in the Volta region to spill over.
Okay, on the issue of the media and civil society, I think there's been a lot of work with not just civil society, but state institutions. I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that the National Peace Council has been working closely with the Chief Imam. The Chief Imam is a leader of the Muslim community in Ghana who enjoys a great deal of respect. And they have worked together, two candidates to come and sign a peace pact on Friday. There's been a media report, and I think that reports on violence and paneling and programs that seek to sort of educate people on electoral violence and to speak against it has also been ongoing. And so the media has also been quite active, and they've carried also peace messages, public service announcements, and peace messages about peace for these elections. So that's sort of what the media has been doing. They've put peace on the media agenda for discussion, for coverage, and they've accommodated public service announcements that speak to peace in conjunction with civil society organizations, including OneUp, for example. So,
yeah, thanks so much.
May I comment on the security situation?
Absolutely.
So well, on the Western Togoland issue, I mean, in terms of this election, and I agree roughly, generally with some of the observations made by Dr. Mache, which is, and I think one also has to make this point, that the base of our two major political parties, one has to be very frank, are constructed around certain ethno-regional coalitions, right? These two parties represent, set at the base, certain ethno-regional coalitions, which as a political force allows each of the parties to really cobble together a national majority that has enabled both parties to take turns in office. To the extent that that is true, it does mean that because of the nature of the coalitions, no particular group feels necessarily disenfranchised in terms of one's ability to be represented in executive office, not just in parliament. You can elect parliaments for parliamentarians from your own local area, but we have been able to run the system in such a way that each of the members of that coalition that constitute these two parties feels adequately represented at the national level where decisions are made. Of course, our politics, once you get into power, is very zero-sum. It's a winner-takes-all system. So at least, you know, for a 4 to 8 year period, if you get re-elected, because of the ethno-regional construction of at the base of these parties, it may sometimes lead to grievances around exclusion. But to the extent you can come to power, then that actually allays that concern. But then there is this other issue. I mean, the issue about the Western Togoland is that the truth of the matter, the demands they're making are not of the nature that can be resolved through the electoral process or through the political process. If you're asking, it would be different if you're making demands about grievances about, say, discrimination or grievances about exclusion. But when you're making grievances about membership of the polity itself, about, you know, you are contesting your membership of the policy as a matter of even international law, then that becomes very, very difficult to resolve within the political arena. Where there could be a spark though, is that some of the areas where the agitation is actually centered is in this election, actually, are also in this election very strongly contested. So for example, the member of parliament, the current minister for energy under the NPP is contesting to wrestle the seat in the K2 North, in the Hohoi area from the NDC, which has always been an NDC stronghold. Now, to the extent that the NPP is making strenuous efforts to flip a constituency that they have never won, and that also happens to be within the domain of the Western Togoland, that makes it a hotspot. It makes it one of the hotspots to look out for, because there is a lot at stake for both parties if that constituency were to split. So from a hotspot standpoint, I can see this, you know, that Western Togoland issue becoming, you know, somewhat of a problem, because it would invite a disproportionate groups there, and sometimes that itself could spark some incident. Our own pre-election survey indicated that the Volta region is exceptional in not wanting armed security. You know, we recorded about 80% in most regions when we posed the question, would you feel more comfortable with armed security around polling stations? In most of the regions, significantly so in Ashanti, the numbers were almost close to 80%. The only part of the country where it was close to 50% was in the Volta region, which suggests a certain discomfort and mistrust of the security forces, and therefore it might have implications for the deployment of forces around the election in those areas. So that is the nature of my concern. It's not really significantly about Western Togoland itself, but they could use this opportunistically to stage some kind of incident that will dramatize their cause or whatever. Otherwise, I don't think in and of itself that is as a secessionist movement, I don't think that they're a major threat by themselves.
Thank you. We are currently doing good on time, but our time is really approaching as well. I would like to go to the last question, and then as you will also reflect on this question, I'll ask you to give a concluding remark and your hopes for December 7th in terms of the aftermath of elections. It is not in doubt that there's a lot of debate and comparing of records on infrastructure within education and economy and so on and so forth. But equally important within comparison is the issue of political corruption. We have seen some initiative and commitment to tackle corruption by current administration. We have seen the creation of the Office of the Special Prosecutor that is supposed to be independent from the Attorney General. And the Attorney General, as we know, has like it's not non-partisan. How are we doing in general terms on the topic of fighting corruption? And are we doing enough, especially in light of current issues that have come between like the banking crisis within private sector and also within the public procurement and so on, and then Galamsey issue that had come some time ago. So what do you think? Are we doing enough in terms of fighting corruptions? And what is the way forward in terms of having a nation that averts corruption? You can answer this and then you give us your concluding remarks.
I can take a quick shot at that. The short answer is we're doing very poorly when it comes to corruption. I think that one of the disappointments of this government and what has undermined some of the flagship policies that were analyzed here that gives them a lot of public sort of support has been corruption. They've done very poorly on corruption. There's been a lot of scandals. Having said that, there have been some attempts at addressing and speaking to corruption. I have in mind the fact that the president fired the director of procurement when it was unearthed that he'd been corrupt. However, you will get investigative journalists like Manasseh who feel quite insecure under this government because they think that when he thinks that when his investigations come too close to people very close to government, then he's intimidated and there are attempts to intimidate him. And so corruption remains an important issue for Ghanaians, although in these elections, it didn't come up strongly until recently because of the public and contentious nature of the resignation of the special prosecutor. I think corruption will always remain an issue in our politics. I think both candidates, because they've been in office, their public record will suggest that they failed in the corruption fight. I don't know whether Ghanaians, so they almost cancel each other out. I don't know whether Ghanaians then will punish, they cancel each other out. Some Ghanaians will want to punish one for corruption. Other Ghanaians will say, we haven't forgotten your past record of corruption. So I'll end there.
Okay, let me come in here and talk about the fact that we need to appreciate corruption in our polity properly. Actually, there's the demand dimension and there's the supply dimension. So I speak of an electoral market. In fact, you have citizens going to politicians to ask them to give them money. I'm speaking from personal experience. I contested, the parliamentary seat somewhere in the year 2000. The moment my name came up, people I was not free with in the society walked to me boldly and asked for money, hiding behind the word honorable. So they come to you, honorable, good morning, how are you? Honorable, This morning, I've not taken any breakfast. Can you give me this? Can you give me that? The impression is that it is the politicians who go out to buy votes. I don't think we are familiar with the situation on the ground. No, it is a market. It's a supply and demand. The electorates, ordinary citizens demand from the politicians as if they have a right to, simply because you have put yourself up to contest for a political office. So that is one angle. And this, to the best of my understanding, has added to the cost of doing politics, the way Professor Prempe talked about, in reference to the CDD study. And so it is a huge cost. Added to that, in the strongholds, and especially in Ashanti region, generally, let me speak of the accretion rate in parliament. You can hardly have one going out there once, twice, third time. People in your constituency will tell you, you've been there long enough. Step down and allow John Owusu also to come. To me, this is also adding to the political corruption, because if I go there once, a member of parliament for the first time, and I'm not sure of a second term, and I've incurred so much cost becoming the member of parliament, obviously, I won't just keep quiet. I won't stay there. There's this incident, a phenomenon that we need to do a study into, that I call political entrepreneurship. There are people with money who are prepared to, finance the politicians in anticipation for cutback when they win political power. So all these add up to really bring pressure to bear on the politicians in office to pay, to defray the cost they have incurred. So in talking about political corruption, to the best of my understanding, it is our politics that will, begin to fight it. It is our politics. And I think Audrey was ending somewhere closer to that. If we wake up one day and the Ghanaian electorate is ready to punish people in office for having, if you like, appropriated unfairly public property for personal use, then definitely we are getting there. Then our politics is beginning to deliver, a case against political corruption. Not until we get there, we'll do a lot of talk. It will not go away. I'm
Professor
done.
Prempe.
Sure. No, I agree. I agree with Audrey that not much has been delivered in the area of corruption. I mean, except of course the creation by legislation of the Office of Special Prosecutor. But I think that is also part of the problem, which is that when you look at the way we have tried to fight corruption, it's mostly through inputs and outputs like that. We will enact a law, we will create an office. It's not really something that ever focuses on the outcome. So once you create the Office of Special Prosecutor, you just check a box. Until the Special Prosecutor's recent resignation, the NPP had checked the box on delivery of the promise of the 2016 manifesto promise on corruption. So when you look at their manifesto and what they've done on corruption, the first thing is a tick on the box for creating the Office of Special Prosecutor. That in of itself becomes celebrated as an accomplishment, even though there have been almost no corruption cases investigated at the time. Part of the problem, of course, is that the prosecution is only at the very retail end of a process that continues. It starts with arrest and investigation. Those parts are still politically controlled. The police, the CID, almost all of the investigative agencies are still politically controlled, and prosecution has been given this kind of limited independence. And they still must rely on the police and the CID and all of that to do their prosecution. It's not working. I agree completely with Dr. Machi that there is a political culture problem. I mean, it is, like I said before, our politics and our political composition almost has no rules, completely no rules. It's like the Wild West. You do whatever there is almost no rules here. people demand, voters demand, money, not just to vote for you. They demand that you sponsor their education. They demand all these things because you are a member of parliament. And, the political class, of course, feels hostage to these kinds of demands on the other hand. But I also think that, it is not to say that they don't have a role in this process. Of course they do, right? And especially the way we are doing public goods delivery without asking citizens to pay. This kind of representation without taxation kind of democracy we have. I think it is part of the problem, because when citizens don't pay through their taxes, whether for corruption or for the development they get, and these things are financed largely through, rents from cocoa or mining or from oil or from borrowing, then, it is easy for you to supply citizens these freebies as long as, so the cure for corruption in our politics is as long as you can give the citizens some things for free, why are they going to worry about corruption? After all, their taxes are not paying for this for the most part, right? So I think that it is a bigger problem. If we want to really construct a polity or an electorate that is very worried about corruption, then you must construct also a polity consisting of citizens who don't just vote, but who really have a fiscal stake in the society, who really are paying taxes of some sort, right? Not to say that we must make tax payment a condition for the franchise, but I'm saying that as long as you have these citizens who don't have a fiscal relationship with the state as such and think everything is free, then corruption is not something they'll be bothered by too much, because after all, it doesn't hit their pocket. So I think it's a bigger problem, and maybe it's a problem that we shouldn't expect there's no magic bullet here. The Office of Special Prosecutor is not it. It cannot address this problem. It is too law enforcement an approach. The problem has bigger sociological dimensions, bigger anthropological dimensions, and we need to unpack all of these things and find the appropriate ways of handling them. So I think I would conclude on the issue of the aftermath. I am a bit worried by the Electoral Commission's self-imposed 24-hour rule. I don't understand the need for it. We have normally, usually tried to conclude our elections within a reasonable time after the close of polls. Within 48, maximum maybe 72 hours, but normally we've done well. But we haven't set firm deadlines for ourselves. And I think that is the smarter way to go, because there's so many things that could go wrong, just logistically, right? There are just so many things that could go wrong. The country is not nearly totally networked, whether by roads or by communication. It might take some time, something might slip. So when the EC imposes on itself this deadline that we will declare the results within 24 hours for the presidential, I don't get it. It is setting itself up. And then again, I think this is sometimes we get a bit too loyally about these things. You want to get the result declared so that every dispute go to court. I don't think that we can judicialize all of these political kinds of problems, right? The idea that when you have announced the results, you wash your hands off it, and now it's for the courts to deal with it. I think it is not particularly a good thing, because we must allow ourselves time to do a diligent job and make sure that every vote is counted. And then once we've allowed that process to run, we can then declare results. We shouldn't be rushing just to meet a self-imposed deadline that we didn't need to have. So I'm a bit worried about it. I welcome, on the other hand, the court's deadline, because it takes too long for us to resolve judicial disputes. And that is also one reason why politicians and political actors and partisans are not interested in going to court. I doubt that a lot of people really are, after the 2012 experience, want to go back to the Supreme Court to litigate this case, because they've come to believe that the elections are won at the polling station. So but it's at least helpful for the court to come out and say, we'll resolve this in 60 days or whatever. That's good. But I would rather see a situation where we didn't even have to go to court, and this is why I think the EC should not force going to court as the solution. They should rather take their time, make sure that all the doubts and everything that may emerge are fixed, and then we can announce the election outcome.
Thank you so much for your last comment. I think this is all that time would allow us. We have 10 minutes over our time, but I think that this is certainly a very good discussions that we've had. We've certainly had a thorough discussion about the issues going into the December 7th elections. And we want to say we are very grateful for your time. So we'd like to thank Professor Audrey Gajoko from the University of Ghana for being part of the panelists. Professor Henry Kwesi Prempeh, who is the Executive Director of Ghana Center for Democratic Development. Thank you so much. And then we have Dr. Kwesi Amachi-Boateng from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. We are so grateful for your time this evening. So this is all that we have for now. Until then, be good, stay blessed, and we will talk soon. All the best in the coming election, everyone.
Okay, have a nice day yourself.
All right, then. Bye.
I studied in Tromsø. If you don't know, I'm telling you.
I'll get